All right. First up, I want to share with you our website and invite you while you're at your screens right now, if you want to go to launchpad.faith, that's launchpad.faith, and take a look at our website as for those of you who will appreciate doing more than one thing at once, you can look at the website while I'm going through it with you. So Launchpad was born out of the experience of Unitarian Universalism in two places, Charlotte and Salisbury, North Carolina, and then Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Oak Ridge had begun as a UU congregation, reaching out to other congregations in their area and providing operational support. Jake Morrill is the minister, one of the ministers at the Oak Ridge congregation. And by operational support, I mean they were providing newsletter support, communications, building website platforms for other congregations, and kind of organically creating these relationships, up to and including one congregation that they work with, where if the phone rings at their location in East Tennessee, it gets picked up at Oak Ridge UU. So all sorts of administrative support for smaller to mid-sized congregations that were finding they weren't able to get the level of support they needed either to really create sustainable ministries to have impact in their community, or simply sometimes to get over that gap place that you need in administrative support in order to focus on more of your mission and grow. So while that's happening in Oak Ridge, at Piedmont, and we're going to share more of the story later on in the call, so I'm kind of going to go through a short clip here. But we began engaging in multi-site ministry. So we had created in 2012 a satellite. We used the language of gathering, so a second gathering to our congregation in Salisbury, North Carolina, which is just about 45 minutes north of our main and founding campus site, which is located in the university area of Charlotte, North Carolina. So these two things are happening, and Jake and I end up going to a conference together that is sponsored by the UUA, a gathering of folks who are engaging in these kind of entrepreneurial multi-site ministries. And we have an epiphany, and we've been describing it this way, so I'll look to your faces to see if this makes sense, or we may have to cut this metaphor. But we realized that we were kind of like peanut butter and chocolate. So you wouldn't necessarily naturally put them together, immediately think about that, but if you could put together the operational support, the administrative support, kind of the management of logistics, with the founding of multi-site communities, that you had this really incredibly organic, if you will, and sustainable opportunity to create networks for Unitarian Universalism in places that Unitarian Universalism otherwise wouldn't exist. And so Launchpad was born. We went back to our respective communities and brought on other partners. Sam Treadaway is one of those partners, as he noted, a lay leader in my community. Fred Holland, who is the Director of Administration at the Oak Ridge UU congregation, is another one of our partners. And Aisha Hauser, who is outside of Seattle, Washington, in one of our large congregations, came on board to be a partner. So if you look at, looks like someone is unmuted. Hey, Corianne, can we go ahead and mute everybody? Okay, great. So if you look at our website that I'm showing you right now, I'm going to pull the browser down so you can see it, launchpad.faith. Essentially how we operate is a little different than consulting firms that come in and give services. We're really interested in cooperative learning. So we're a cooperative where we create partnerships with existing congregations, emerging congregations, and Unitarian Universalist communities, and create a dynamic in which we can continue to learn from one another. We might learn something if we partnered with you that we could pass on to another community. And so we don't necessarily come in, we have some things that we've learned over time that are recommendations we make, but we're also hoping this is an experience where we can continue to learn and create a larger and ongoing sustainable network of Unitarian Universalist communities engaged in multi-site ministry. We really believe in the changing financial trends and the changing generational shifts that we've seen, the cultural realities of our country right now, and kind of the face of American religion, that multi-site will be one of, not the, but one of the ways in which religion in America begins to adapt, and in another way in which Unitarian Universalism could not only be sustainable but have more missional impact. That is, instead of spending our resources on trying to build a particular structure of a congregation that's largely built right off of a 1950s model and reality, what is it that we could build if we created collaborative networks that are more cooperative in their nature, connective, and we would say in the context of Unitarian Universalism, covenantal. Launchpad as a whole, as a cooperative learning enterprise, really focuses in 3 areas. You'll see them at the top of our website right there: ready, able, launch. So our ready work is all of those operational pieces that I talked about Oak Ridge engaging with, everything from membership database, pledging and contribution, website development, newsletters, communication support. This is particularly helpful, we've found, for our small to mid-sized congregations that are existing, or for those that might be working on a merger. Our ABLE is focused in leadership development. So the ready kind of gets your systems prepared to then do the leadership development and really training and crafting to make that missional shift, to begin to think in a way where we can say the sky isn't falling, the sky is opening. How do you empower your leaders for that opportunity, generative thinking, and also with the skills that you will need in order to move into our launch phase. Now, our launch work is all about different kinds of transformation. So sometimes these things come together, often they do. Some of the folks we're working with in collaborative partnership may only take one piece of our launch work. Today we're going to be focusing on multi-site ministry, but we also work in multi-faith collaboration. I founded in Charlotte a clergy coalition of 76 faith leaders. And with the recent events in Charlotte with the shooting and death of Keith Lamont Scott and then Justin Carr, we learned how important that multi-faith collaboration was on the ground in order to create responses that were justice-centered, healing, and restorative, and brought the community together. So multi-faith collaboration can help a community or leaders think about how better to engage in a multi-faith context. Cross-cultural engagement, Aisha helps us with a lot of, this is kind of her wheelhouse with me supporting her. So cross-cultural engagement is talking about, where are the partnerships in your community? With an existing community, how could you broaden your cross-cultural engagement? We also think that multi-site is a way to create more cross-cultural engagement. So, for example, we'll talk a little bit about this, but we're working with a community now trying to found a gathering in a predominantly African-American community, just a little south of Atlanta, still within the city limits. In Salisbury, we found that we created a community that was primarily working class, which was a new place for Unitarian Universalism to be existing. So how is it that multi-site, again, these aren't explicit, these aren't siloed areas. A lot of times, any community we're working with will be engaging multiple ends. And then last, social justice ministry. So how do you move from the social action committee model or even the project planning model, task orientation, into really creating social justice ministry within? So that's kind of the overview of our launch work, and I encourage you to do some more browsing on launchpad.faith and get familiar with our different offerings, and also please look at the videos that explain the vision of Launchpad, and do be in touch if you have any questions. We'll talk a little more about that at the end of this call. I want to move in now to the story of Salisbury, and I'm just gonna bear with me for a moment while I unshare. Here we go. Because I want you to be able to see Sam while he's speaking to you. There we go. Okay. Let's see. Corian. Oh, here we go. Okay, great. Now y'all are back. I couldn't get the stop share button to come up. You're going to be looking at a very full desktop. So we're going to move into now the story of Salisbury, and Sam's going to help share with me the story of how the Salisbury Gathering and the MultiSite work at Piedmont really began. From there, we have a short presentation on our MultiSite model, so we can explain to you what this looks like and what a collaborative and cooperative partnership really could begin to envision that in your location. And then again at 2:10, we'll move into Q&A. So Sam, I don't know if you want to give a little background on Piedmont as a congregation to kick us off. It looks like you're unmuted, and I'm going to go ahead and mute my audio as we get into the story.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, good. All right. Piedmont, it was originally a spin-off congregation from the larger congregation, the UU Church in Charlotte. And we had a congregation that was on the south side of town with a lot of folks driving across town to get to the services. And so there was a core group of that church that started a spin-off congregation, a separate congregation, Piedmont UU Church. I mention that because I think it's important to recognize that part of the culture of Piedmont has always been to be a regional church, not to necessarily be a neighborhood church, although we certainly have a neighborhood presence in the university area where we are now. But there's always been a lot of folks that were unchurched, looking for something different, a progressive faith coming in from numerous counties, actually. So that's part of the DNA of our congregation, I think. We were nomadic because we, like many folks, struggled to find the resources that we needed to buy a property. And we finally we have a campus now, so that's one hurdle that we're no longer nomadic. But at the same time, we were still struggling to reach those folks that were just geographically not able to attend, at least on a routine basis, because of distance or time. So one of those areas is north of us. It's a fairly conservative county, but there were progressives that were interested in the faith, but really logistics got in the way. And at the same time, after Robin came, our enrollment, or our membership rather, really jumped, and she can give you those facts and figures a lot better than I can. But space became an issue, and I know I've heard several folks mention that space is an issue for them, and possibly logistics, distance, things like that. So we started to think outside the box. How can we meet the needs of our congregation in our campus and out of our campus, off our campus? How can we meet those needs in a collaborative way? And so Salisbury was the result of that. And Robin, I don't know if you want to talk more about that or if you'd like me to elaborate.
Sure. Yeah. I can kind of pick up where Sam left off, and then Sam jump in at any time.
Okay.
So I arrived to Charlotte and serving as the minister at the time, the solo minister at the Piedmont UU Church in 2010. Shortly after I arrived, we began experiencing pretty rapid growth, anywhere from 30 to 38% per year for the first 2 years. within 6 months of my arriving at Piedmont, there was a family that had been driving in from Salisbury. Again, it's about 45 minutes distance without traffic, and there's often traffic. So it easily, especially during the week for other activities, at the congregation could be an hour and 15 minutes. I mean, you can be sitting there each way. So this family approached me and they said, look, we love being members here. We love this community, but we don't feel a part of this community. We can only come on Sundays. We have kids. We have to get them back home on Sunday. And our day is just wiped out after coming here. We can never do anything during the week. We can't stay for any activities after on Sundays because we have to get back home with the driving distance and we don't know how long it's going to be. And so initially, I don't know that they totally knew or any of us knew what we were envisioning. I just knew that I was in a rapidly growing congregation in a new place 6 months into a brand new ministry. And so my first answer was no. Like, okay, I'm sorry for the difficulty you're having. But frankly, I was pretty resistant early on. The models that I had seen for MultiSite ministry were by and large larger congregations. So I didn't even have a map in my mind for what MultiSite could look like with a smaller congregation. Numbers-wise, when I arrived in 2010, Piedmont was a little over 100 members, 100 active members. And then within that first year, we were at about 140. And then year two, we're up to about 170 members. And so it was hard for me to imagine how we could possibly do multi-site, because at that point, I really thought that multi-site meant more work, and multi-site was a large congregation thing. As a quick background, I've spent some time in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the Albuquerque congregation has branches. Before that, I was in Malden, Massachusetts in my student field education, and in Malden they're a merger of congregations, and then my home congregation is Rochester, New York, which has a satellite. They're yoked with the congregation in Canandaigua, that's upstate New York. So both the Rochester congregation and the Albuquerque congregations, right, are large congregations. So I knew what mergers were in the New England context, and I had a handle on what I thought was multi-site, large congregations starting satellites around them. And I just didn't think we qualified. Well, the family was persistent. They came back to us about a year later and said, we still really want this. What could we do? At that point, I reached out for district resources, and our then district executive, Annette Marquis, helped me get them, some books to study about Unitarian Universalism, some small group ministry, and we looked into the history. There had been 2 attempts to start congregations in Salisbury by Unitarian Universalists. Both had failed, one because of the sheer burnout. Those of you who've ever been part of a congregation startup know that if you're doing it solo, there's a steep hill to climb. I look at Sam, who has pulled chairs out of a van more times than he would like to count and brought them into a daycare center. And then the second time it failed, not only because of burnout, but because of the overwhelm of trying to write bylaws and set up a board and do all of the governance and policy work, which very few people, in my experience, show up on Sunday to you and say, gosh, I want to write some policies, or I would love to be the author of some bylaws, So we went in kind of with some skepticism. At least I went into the Salisbury conversation with some skepticism. And I really thought I'd say, hey, go study this book, and it would kind of buy me time to say no, frankly. But they came back a year and a half later, and they had done everything that the district executive asked, everything that Sam and I had envisioned. And in fact, that family, one of the members of that family, Shakisha Gray, is now in seminary. She's now pursuing a call to Unitarian Universalist ministry. And Shakisha was persistent and had a vision. And so I said, okay, let's have a potluck. And you get all the folks that you think are interested in. Let's just see what this would look like. At that point, I really thought we were talking about creating a small group ministry. We have what we call chalice circles. And I thought, okay, we're going to create a chalice circle in Salisbury. We can do that once a month. Got it. I showed up to the potluck. Sam was there. Sam, how many folks would you say were there at the potluck, counting children?
Counting children, 20,
Yeah.
25?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So we sat in a big circle. We were outside. And, you know, dreams are born in strange places. Sometimes it's in a circle of hot, sweaty folks that are getting eaten by mosquitoes in a backyard in one of the most conservative counties in all of North Carolina, Rowan County. And I just asked them to go around the circle and let's share what you long for in this place that isn't here now. And folks began sharing. And it became really clear as they named religious education for their children, as they named a weekly worship experience, as they talked about small group connections and social justice ministry. It became really clear that they were talking about a whole lot more than a chalice circle, and that they wanted to be a part as well of the Piedmont UU Church. They didn't want to create a new and separate congregation, and that we were talking about multi-site ministry. So Sam and I went back to the board and began having conversations and envisioning what this would look like. And there was a lot of reservation. You know, I think people weren't exactly sure how a small congregation, again, at that point, not even 200 members, could launch a multi-site ministry. At that point, was the only minister on staff and the only full-time staff person. What exactly would this look like? And at times, frankly, it felt like we were building the plane while we were flying it. I don't know if Sam, you may have a different vantage point than I have on that. And one thing that we longed for was a partner, right? To be part of a cooperative where we could learn from other leaders, where we could learn from other communities that had undergone multi-site and that weren't necessarily large congregations. And we found it really hard to find someone who could companion us kind of in the field where we were growing this new thing. We had folks who were willing to help, but we needed someone with the experience. There were times when something would happen and it was hard to discern, is this a key piece that we need to build on and pay attention and nurture? Is this a crisis? Is this part of the process? And longing for those collaborative partners is in part what led to Launchpad. You know, who you going to call is already taken by Ghostbusters, but we needed who are we going to call at times? I needed a colleague. Our lay leaders needed peers and colleagues that they could speak to, someone who'd been through it on a board, particularly in the times of anxiety. What we discovered in Salisbury as we created this multi-site ministry, we called it Gatherings, was that we were creating something I don't think we even totally understood the impact of. We were so in the logistics of it. And Sam, I don't know if you want to.
I would agree.
A little bit about that.
Well, and I mentioned earlier the origin of Piedmont was that it was a spin-off congregation. And I think talking about the little bit of a reticence with the leadership early on was, well, this is going to be another spin-off. I think it took a little bit of time to help everyone understand the difference between what we were trying to accomplish and what led to the origin of Piedmont to begin with. Was this is not a spinoff. This is a collaboration. This is a way to share our progressive message so that everybody wins. So there was an education piece there of letting folks know what we were doing and perhaps even more importantly, what we were not doing. But the covenant and the relationships there in Salisbury are hard to put in words. It's a very close group. That first meeting, the thing that I took away was that they were looking for community. And they have certainly found that there.
And from the perspective of the minister in the situation, because a lot of times ministers, when I say the word multi-site, kind of like go backward and make this face that, oh my goodness, this is going to be completely overwhelming. And what I found, in my own experience was I did have to work smarter. So I had to plan ahead a whole lot more. I had to think about how to share resources in different ways, how to plan worship in a different way than I had ever done before, how to shift gears to go from the context of, leading a service for 100 people versus 20 people, really different dynamics there. But in the midst of all of that, it was energizing for me. I was growing and learning, and I didn't find myself exhausted. And the times where I found myself tiring, I had to learn that I wasn't really doing multi-site well. It wasn't a problem with the concept of multi-site. It was my own inability at that moment to adapt, to let go, to lean in or to lean back, depending upon the situation. And, we started services in Salisbury in November of 2012. I was 2 years into my time with Piedmont at that point. And that third year, in some ways, at the congregation was a hard year, right? And we kind of joke about that sometimes in ministry, that it can be challenging, right? The honeymoon's over with. And there were some ways that Salisbury helped remind me what Unitarian Universalism could be, should be, and reminded me of that in ways that were important, that helped me, frankly, avoid burnout. It's hard, as Sam said, to really capture what Salisbury has done. I mean, we are the only progressive space for folks who are looking for a faith community in Salisbury and Rowan County. There is an evangelical African-American, somewhat progressive community that's being founded now, and we have created some partnership with them. We've taken justice positions on everything from marriage equality to racial justice in Salisbury, and have been a witness and a presence for those. In ways that there would not have been a faith voice speaking at all on those issues. We've also led coalitions of movements. There's now a truth and reconciliation process that has begun in Salisbury because of our presence there and the work of our members showing up for community meetings and saying, we need to talk about this as a community. One of the stories that I sometimes share is that we are a community. We're right across from the Veterans Administration Hospital, and we meet in a Reform Jewish synagogue. And so we've had a couple of veterans over the years. And one of the veterans that we had, who was a member of our community, was diagnosed with a terminal illness about 6 months after joining our community. He was in a really religiously conservative context in his family, and in his neighborhood and circle of friends, and he felt terribly alone, and we were able to help navigate those boundaries for him in the midst of his diagnosis and a very painful time. We were able to minister to him and hold him and provide a spiritual support that otherwise he would not have had. I mean, he would often be in tears just with gratitude for the conversations that he could have and the words he could say in our gathering that he couldn't say at his home with his family. And he found a peace, I think, because of our community and its presence. We've also had a member of our community who's an out lesbian who's been in a really difficult custody battle over a period of years now. And it's our members who showed up in the courtroom and showed support so that they weren't alone. And having your minister in a small town show up and the judge know that means a lot. It's no small thing. So people's lives have been changed, I have no doubt, and have been saved. And you really begin to see how Unitarian Universalism can be present and how our faith can be changed, frankly, by being in a different community context. I mean, we're in a very conservative county. We're also in a very poor county. There's some, in Salisbury, some kind of historic money, but then there's also a lot of folks who are just really hurting. And with the VA, there's also a lot of veterans who are hurting. So, I think that one of the things I want to emphasize in MultiSite is the way that it can change you too. We sometimes talk about how we're going to change the world, but I have found that it has enriched my own understanding of what it is to be a Unitarian Universalist and what's the core of our faith. Sam, do you want to share any more about Salisbury specifically before?
Well, I think you did a good job of talking about what it feels like to be there. I would just say that as someone who was raised in a evangelical home, one of the things that Salisbury and MultiSite ministry allows us to do is to share our message. And I feel like there are times when we are reticent to do that, but this is a way where our progressive faith into work. I just find that the more I attend Salisbury or go outside our immediate church community, there are a lot of hurting people looking for something, and I think we have something to offer. And it's really rewarding when we can meet that need in a tangible way. So I guess I'm echoing what you say. It's not just about changing the world. It certainly is looking inward as to meeting a need that I have to share the progressive faith message.
So when we started in Salisbury in 2012, shortly after our first service, we had just about, I'm going to give you some kind of logistics on the community, where we've been, how things look week to week. And then we're going to move into the multi-site model. So what would it be like to create some gatherings in your context, or a merger, or to begin thinking in multi-site? How long does it take, and what are the processes? So in Salisbury, when we began, we were just about 12 members, I think. When we first incorporated, it was 12 or 13. We've got 32 now adult members, plus anywhere the children range on a Sunday, as you can imagine. But we've got about 20 children enrolled in our program in Salisbury. And then a handful of folks. The other thing we found in Salisbury was that there was a real hunger for something other than membership, because we have people who have businesses. It's a small town, and have family ties to particular faith communities. And so they weren't wanting to become a member. They were willing to pledge and support the community and attend on Sundays, but they needed something else other than membership. And so our friend group at Salisbury is pretty sizable relative to the total membership. Most years, it's been 1/3 of our membership numbers in Salisbury are also friends. But again, supporting, I want to be clear about that, because they're all supporting the ministry of the Piedmont UU Church. So we talk about being one congregation in two places. And that's the language that we use. We have two gatherings. In this process, we had to rename the Piedmont. So the Piedmont UU Church, when we began, right, was our physical location as well as our identity. And so we renamed that physical location where we were first founded to be the University Gathering. And we called Salisbury the Salisbury Gathering. So we have the University Gathering and the Salisbury Gathering. And together we are all the Piedmont UU Church. Anyone who joins the congregation, either as a member or a friend in Salisbury, is a full member or friend in the Piedmont UU Church, just as anyone who joins in the University Gathering is a full member in the Piedmont UU Church. Or, yeah, I said that right, University Gathering. I start getting turned around sometimes. We all are guided by the same set of bylaws, by one board and one set of policies. Now, there are different procedures, of course, for how, Sunday services or fellowship time. There's different procedures, but the policies and the board are the same. In this process, we shifted to policy governance, which was really important, I think, for our ability to lead in the Salisbury gathering, and to make on-the-ground quick decisions that didn't have to go to a monthly board meeting, but could be made by myself or by the leaders there. And that has been an asset for us as we made this transition. We do not track pledges separately from Salisbury. We do track Sunday attendance and plate collection separately, but we report the numbers together, so that we're really clear, and we have been clear from the beginning. They are fully invested in the Piedmont UU Church. If Salisbury should ever want to be its own congregation, we would wish them well. And at the same time, we are not like parceling out funds that they could draw at some later date. And those were all part of the initial agreements that we talked about. Salisbury is currently renting space. It was important for us to share in a faith space because of how conservative Salisbury is as a town and Rowan County is. We felt we needed the legitimacy of a faith community. What we were kind of surprised by were the relationships that grew out of renting space. So we've developed relationships with the temple that we're renting from, but also there's a Presbyterian church right next door, John Calvin Presbyterian. We eventually grew to need more space for our children. We developed a relationship with John Calvin. Now we have an annual potluck between the three communities for Thanksgiving. And we've also done a food drive together. And so it's been good for us on a lot of different levels to be within a faith community. Although there have been challenges. There have been challenges with that as any rental, you don't control your property. And so it can be challenging sometimes, but we've worked through those challenges. Renting also allows us to be a whole lot more sustainable, right? We don't have the liability of a building that we own. And so at this point in time, it's not part of our strategic plan to ever own property in Salisbury. We want to continue to rent in order to be flexible and not have the burden of a building. We talk about the 3 Bs. So we have really tried to insulate Salisbury as a young and small community from the burden of the 3 Bs. Building, so that's why they rent. Board, that's why we have one board. And bylaws. We've already written our bylaws, and they're governed by the same set of bylaws that we have. On the board, there is someone who regularly attends a Salisbury gathering, and that is intentional. But we have not changed our bylaws to have a person who kind of represents Salisbury. The reason we've not done that is we feel it would create a divided board where people were supposed to represent their own interests. And we're one board. Well, I shouldn't say we. I should say they are one board. And Sam is on that board now. And Sam, I don't know if you want to speak to how that decision was made or that dynamic.
Well, just to echo what you said, we were very intentional when we were looking at our change in governance. We had to look at our bylaws, and we were very intentional about the members, whether they're designated president, president-elect, treasurer, at-large, whatever, to not come at issues from a particular perspective. Our board has been very supportive of Salisbury. Occasionally they'll visit, although, and I encourage that because it's hard coming from a mid-sized congregation. I think for a lot of the folks that weren't around when we were so small, it kind of reminds them of it's a very different climate feel when you're in that small group setting. They come back and they're excited and they talk about it because it's an experience that's very different than the larger congregation. But yes, the board has been supportive, and I guess the word that comes to mind is they really it's been faith. It's really been a mission of faith. not something that, okay, what are we going to gain from this? That's never been the question. It's what can we do to, again, share the progressive faith message. And this has been a way that is, that allows us to do that. And also, we're talking about renting space, it allows us to be nimble. If we ever do need to change location or whatever, owning property would not only be financially an issue, it would kind of corner us into a particular position that may or may not work 10 years from now. So I guess our situation is very nimble. If the need be, we could change location or move to the other side of town or whatever we need to do.
So in terms of how it looks like on a weekly basis, we now, because of Salisbury and because of our growth, have been able to hire a part-time minister of congregational care and a part-time Salisbury gathering minister. And so the worship schedule, which is usually the question people ask right away, you know, how do your services work on a Sunday? How do you make that all work? And so what we do is, on any given month, in a 4-Sunday month, I will be leading services at the university gathering 2 to 3 times a month. And once every other month, I will either be at the Salisbury gathering, or there's a congregation in Lake Norman that we have just begun conversation with on. There's a possibility they may become a gathering of Piedmont as well. So I'm at one of those 2 places. Our minister of congregational care preaches once a month at the university gathering, and then once at the Salisbury gathering. The Salisbury gathering minister preaches 2 Sundays, right, lead services. I'm saying preaching, but it could be a ritual Sunday or multi-gen where there's not a sermon. Lead services twice a month at the Salisbury gathering. And then they have a video most months in a 4-Sunday month. That 3rd Sunday at the Salisbury gathering is a video of something I've preached at the university gathering, and the rest of the service is led by a trained worship associate at Salisbury. And then the 4th Sunday is either the minister from Lake Norman, our minister of congregational care, or me. So it's a little hard to follow all that. Then 5th Sundays are what we call service Sundays. So in lieu of a sermon, we do a service project together. And we do that at all 3 sites. So Salisbury, University, and we've begun to already move into shared worship services with the Lake Norman gathering. What that means is, while I may be leading services some month on every Sunday, I have some months where I lead all 4 Sundays. I have some months where I lead 3 Sundays. But most months, at most, I'm only creating 2 services because I'm going to different places. So that's where the working smarter, not harder comes in. And what that means is I can create better services, frankly, when I'm not running Sunday to Sunday, and I can actually think more broadly. And it means I have more time to do ministry in the community than I had before. In addition, Salisbury has a humanist group that meets once a month. They also have a small group called Chalice Circle that meets once a month, and soon they will be moving into having meditation. They have a adult education class on that they usually have 1 course in the fall and 1 course in the spring. And then they have full religious education on Sundays, just as our university gathering does, and childcare. And then they organically plan fellowship. So sometimes they'll do a potluck. They always have like coffee and cookies afterward. Sometimes they've done a shared meal at someone's home, recognizing that they're smaller. So they're, again, their fellowship opportunities and their services have to be translated to their context. I want to move us in now into what would it look like if you wanted to form a gathering, if you wanted to start a gathering. How could Launchpad be a collaborative partner in that? And what exactly would that mean? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Again, no judgment on the vast number of files that are on my desktop. All right. So we went through Launchpad, kind of what the launch feature of our work does. I want to give you a couple of models. Now, there are many models out there for multi-site ministry, and I'm just going to give you two to show you how Launchpad could work with you. Let me put this down. Okay. So this first model is right where you have a congregation that is larger than their gatherings. One thing that we learned in Salisbury that I really want to emphasize to y'all today, which is going to probably sound pretty scary, and you might even say, no way that we can do this. But, oh, Janice, I'm sorry that you got a emergency. We'll miss you and wish you safe travel, and may everything be okay with your family. So moving into, one second. Okay. Here we go. All right. So one of the gathering models is you have a larger congregation. We're strongly recommending, based on our experience, that communities not start one gathering at once, but that they start two. The reason for that is it compels you to think systemically and to do that work smarter, not harder dynamic. And it also creates peers and partners for the other site. So we found that sometimes Salisbury felt like something in particular was happening to them when it was really just a breakdown in overall systems, not a particular decision made to slight them at the cost of the university gathering. If we had had two models, we would have had to do more of that systemic work. So this is one model. You'll see Launchpad in the center there, right? And we really function in these initial phases as kind of a conduit of communication between the gatherings and the main congregation. Okay, going on to the next slide. Now, some of you are in contexts already where you are doing partnering. So rather than founding a new community, you're thinking about what could the shared collaboration, what new covenants could be created between existing congregations. In that role, you see Launchpad here in the blue. We help facilitate those initial communications. We help create the system setup and can be a partner in that generative thinking, in that cooperative learning model that we have. We're less in the middle here because we're trying to help you translate your particular policies and procedures and bylaws and culture and ethos and mission to one another in order to craft something entirely new. If you are starting a new planning, our process is to begin with an assessment. So from the moment we have the initial conversation, we begin to call that the assessment period. And we say it's about 1 to 4 months. And in this period of time, you're doing a lot of discernment, research, you're floating ideas in your community. So one of the things we did with Salisbury in the university gathering is we started to float the idea and to share information about, well, what would it be like? Not saying we're going to go ahead and do this, but let's get some feedback. You know that you're ready to proceed past assessment once you have 20% of your membership on board. That means that they could really be advocates for this process. They understand it. 20% is a tipping point in how the dynamic in your congregation will change. That's not to say you don't have some folks who are still saying the sky is falling, this is a terrible idea, but that you've got 20% of people who are on board and excited. And you've also identified at least 2 community leaders for each of the gatherings. Phase 2 is called incubation. Typically, this is about 5 to 9 months. It can be sped up a little bit, but you really want to get phase 2 right because it's sort of the foundation for everything else you'll do. You need to be able to articulate your governance and then how that governance translates on the ground with your gathering. We do strongly recommend policy governance, but it's not an absolute no-go. We can find other ways to translate and to work with you as a cooperative partner. But clarity on the front end saves you a lot of pain later on because of miscommunication. Then looking at staff. So who's going to be responsible for this? Who's going to own it? Who really sees themselves as having this in their portfolio? What leaders do you need to recruit for each of the gatherings? You've identified those leaders. You've put together a budget. You've written some policies. Even if you have policy governance, you're going to need to write policies specific to the multi-site model and the gathering. And then you want to begin to host some community events in the place where you want to start the satellite. Host some meetings at the gathering site. Like we did that potluck, right? These don't have to be super formal. You could be going to community outreach events, but just, kind of start getting a pulse for the community. You're ready to proceed past incubation when you've created the budget, a governance chart, when you have your policies in place, and when you have a clear staff chart that says, okay, here's the flow of the ministry that will need to be completed. Here are the volunteer roles, and here are the paid staff roles, and here are the expectations. In sharing the vision, this is from 10 to 14 months. This is really when you tell the story. How does this multi-site model connect to your mission, your identity? So you heard Sam talk about Piedmont always being a regional church that was put into existence because of another UU congregation. So this kind of pay it forward, right, dynamic. Some would call that evangelical, if you will. But this understanding of sharing Unitarian Universalism was in our DNA, and we began to articulate how multi-site was not some new crazy idea that Robin brought to us, but that was really embedded and grounded in the story of who we are. And then, quite frankly, you need to create a public relations campaign. You need to explain why this matters, what it can do, and Launchpad really helps as a cooperative partner here. How are you not only going to tell the story, but how are you going to communicate the vision for where you're going and how multi-site is one of the roads to get you there? Then you're recruiting your core team, 5 to 7 folks. They're going to be on the ground. We use the language of a steering team in Salisbury. But who are going to be your folks who are like on it, responsible, especially for that first year? We had some folks like Sam and his wife Risa who agreed for a year to really sort of embed themselves in the life of Salisbury, to help teach them what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist community. Eventually they came back regularly to the university gathering, primarily on Sundays. But for that initial phase, they were willing to make that commitment. You want to secure your gathering launch items. So you got to have your rental down, have that lease signed, have a clear promise of what programming you're doing and what you're not doing. It's okay to not do it all. Different communities are going to look like different things. Some may not even have worship as their primary point of connection. And Launchpad tries to help you think creatively and also responsively. So responding to your context and really what you're hearing from the people. You've got your schedule lined up. You've done a service rehearsal and what we call a soft launch. So we learned this from evangelical communities. A soft launch is where you actually host a service or a service project or a small group ministry gathering or a house church or whatever your model is going to be that we help you create. You do a soft launch, invite the key people that you know are going to be involved, and actually host that first event before you do the full court press. You're going to learn a whole lot from that soft launch, and that will help you be prepared for the evaluative outcome of sharing the vision, which is a congregational vote. Once you've had the congregational vote, then you are ready to go ahead and launch. In the launch phase, we do an evaluation 2 months out and 6 months out. Certainly welcome to do additional evaluations, but that's where Launchpad is really the partner in those early evaluations. We recommend for at least the first 2 years a quarterly fiscal analysis, and we can teach you how to do that, as well as strategic growth benchmark. So Launchpad's going to continue to partner with you and to be, in this cooperative learning that first year out. And we want to see you have at least 20% growth. If you don't have that 20% growth, then we really need to do some evaluative work and try to figure out what's going on, because our experience is these communities grow quickly early. And then, of course, we hit some plateaus, and then you need to create some more strategy plans. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, knowing it's 2:06, and I want to give you all enough time for questions. I know I spoke pretty quickly. Corianne, can we go ahead and unmute folks now for our question and answer?
I'll pick one. Let me get the thumb group.
And then,
oops. Yeah, I'll put the thumb group.
Okay. So, okay. So maybe we need to remute Corianne, everybody. And then if you have a question, unmute yourself.
Excellent. That sounds terrific. Good job. Good job.
Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and take some questions. We've given you a lot of information. What questions do you have?
I have a question, Janet, Ani. It sounds to me like Launchpad is, in another world, would be considered a consulting exercise. My question is there a charge? Is there a cost for this service to Unitarian Universalist congregation, considering this?
Yes, so we do, and we have a price sheet that we can send out. We do charge for example, when we're going out to visit you, we need to be compensated for transportation and lodging costs, and then there's some very low consulting fees. We are also working right now to create kind of a launch funding campaign. And so we're looking for some communities who are ready to launch MultiSite to come on board with us and create a proposal whereby we would ask you to come forward with an amount of money that then would be matched by a donor who wants to see Unitarian Universalism grow.
Excellent. Okay.
So it's not the same kind of consulting pricing model that you may have experienced with other consultants. Ours is, again, that's why we use that language of cooperative, because we're each coming to the table with these resources really focused right on growing Unitarian Universalism and its impact in the world.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. And we will follow up with an email to all of you after this call, and I can send out some of our preliminary pricing sheets. I caution you, just because it's contextual, different folks need different things, and we always write up an individualized proposal, and we're glad to have a follow-up conversation with you, get a better sense of your needs, and then craft a particular proposal.
That would be really helpful. A range is what I'm looking for.
Sure, yeah, and we can send that as well as the funding campaign. And then let's set up, Janet, a one-on-one call. So that would enable me to create, a proposal that is more tailored.
Right.
And realistic. Right. We do ask, one thing that we've learned that's important, because the cooperative model is maybe a little bit different than folks have experienced, we really like to share the proposal directly with a board and with core leadership. And so, excuse me, so we set up a Zoom call just like this with boards and with core team leaders all the time to not only go through the proposal, but go through the vision and really explain how we'll work together. And we like to do that pitch directly so that, we can.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Good. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Sure. While we're sitting thinking about other questions you might have, I want to introduce Jake Morrill, who's on the call now, came in during the presentation. Jake, do you want to introduce yourself? I already shared the fabulous metaphor of peanut butter and chocolate, so I'll let you decide if it's peanut butter or chocolate.
I don't know which one I am today, but it's great to be with you all. Thanks for showing up. This is so exciting. You know, I think Unitarian Universalism is at this exciting place in the 21st century where a lot of the old models of organization and of funding and of leadership are changing, and there's a lot more questions out there than answers. But in the last year or two, I'm seeing people who are really coming forward with answers, and we are learning as we go. As we have conversations with people, we're sort of carrying the wisdom. We're like bees, you know, like carrying wisdom from one flower to the other to the other. So it's so great that you all are here, and hopefully we can, you are willing to bring in some leaders and maybe see if we can have some phone calls and some conversations just to see what's possible.
So I have a comment, not so much a question, just telling you a little about our three-church collaborative. One of the things that we have done is to hire an intern, ministerial intern who serves all three churches. Actually, one of the churches is her home church, and then she's serving the other two churches. So this is kind of evidently a new model. We know that it's new because we got the intern manual from the UUA. You can see Mary grinning over here, and which made absolutely no reference to multi-site placements of interns. So one of the things we plan to do is to write back to the UUA and say, can you add some lines here about, and if you have more than one church, remember X, Y, and Z. But it's one of the things we're hoping will come from this, and I'm sure Margaret will agree, as Mary and Karen will, that this intern is going to help us focus on social justice issues. And one of our major purposes of having the collaboration is to have two smallish congregations and one very small congregation become one larger group in terms of social justice efforts. So we're kind of looking to see what path we can begin to beat out for that particular goal.
Have y'all been in touch with the folks in New Orleans?
No.
So they created a Greater New Orleans organization built around sharing social justice ministry in the Greater New Orleans area. Yeah, I can help get you in touch with those folks.
That would be very welcome.
There might be some, cross learnings,
right,
that you'd have.
And just to tell you a little bit about our structure, we have this collaborative ministry team, which so far consists of 3 people from each church, including the minister from each church. Mm-hmm. And Margaret's just new this year because she just happily became full-time minister in Castine. But the ministers agreed to stay on the team 1 more year, and then possibly after that it will evolve to a little bit different structure. But so far that's working really well, and we have put on a 3-church service. Last June was our first effort at having a 3-church service, which was very exciting, and we'll do another one next year. And we're having a 3-church retreat at Ferry Beach in southern Maine at the end of October. So we're trying to do these things that are appealing to everybody. We're facing obstacles that I think Janet mentioned and a couple others of getting people to drive. Each church is an hour, more or less 45 minutes to an hour from each other. So we can't really do things that are each church that the others are invited to because people kind of drag their feet about driving that much. We do have one central location that we're going to try to do things at, but we haven't launched that yet. We're hoping to do maybe some adult education classes, that kind of thing.
We one of the things we started doing now that we have 3 places, or potentially a 3rd now, we started doing what we call all ritual Sundays or all service Sundays. And so when we have like the annual blessing of animals or the annual service of remembrance, we create a Google Doc, and the ministers all take different pieces of it, and they write the service together. And then there's usually one person who's kind of the collaborator and goes through the whole service and makes sure it's streamlined. But we even started writing homilies together. And it takes us half of the time, if not, to create the service. And it's so much richer because of the different perspectives that you get into that. And then each of the places, though they're having their own service, are utilizing the same experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really fantastic. That's a great idea, Margaret. And Mary, we can build on that. And Karen? It's really been interesting doing this Three Church Collaborative, because we kind of feel like, sky's the limit, and it's just keeping up the energy of the collaboration team that's kind of a challenge at some time.
Yeah, sure. Well, power to you.
Yeah, thank you.
There may be, this is sort of a random idea, but I'm thinking about as we try to figure out these yoked models or multi-site models in the 21st century, there's a retired UU minister here in our congregation who's 93 years old or so, and in 1948 as a student minister, he was serving 3 or 4 churches. I think that this is a new model, and it's also an old model. And so there may be some elders, some retired folks, especially ministers, but maybe laity, who remember how they figured things out. And there may be some wisdom even in the congregations. Just a thought about, where to get some ideas.
Thanks, Jake, for that reminder. I've been reading A History of Universalism in America. And so sometimes I joke to folks when I'm getting ready to go to Salisbury that I'm getting on my horse. But there are these older models, right? And with technology now, we don't necessarily have to get on the horse anymore.
Right, that's right. And we're trying to take more advantage of the technology for that purpose. But in fact, 2 of our former ministers in Ellsworth served Castine part-time and Ellsworth part-time. So we do have that model of having had shared congregations with one minister, which they found somewhat difficult. So this, luckily, Margaret and Sarah and Dean don't have to share their churches, but we get to share them. They rotate. We're going to do a rotation of them also switching pulpits. So we are going to have a very rich ministry this year with the intern and the 3 ministers from the churches.
That's great.
This is Mellon Kennedy from Vermont, and I thank all of you so much for doing this. It's really quite wonderful. The multi-site idea has been on my heart for a long time. Here in northern New England, it seems to me it's the hope, for a lot of our small churches. And one of the challenges I wonder about, which is a different situation than what you addressed, Robin, when there's already existing churches that have different cultures, to bring them together, I think, is quite challenging. I mean, some cultures, churches that I'm familiar with, I do a lot of preaching around in Vermont, so I get to visit in New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts and get a really different feeling from the different congregations. So some of them I think would do really well together, and others it would be like oil and vinegar. And just as you're thinking about doing this work with already existing, and the yoked model, one of the models you presented, where there are multiple that are connecting. So any wisdom around the cultural difference and how to bring unity? Just thoughts about that.
If Mary and Margaret and Karen don't mind, I'll speak to that a little bit. We started out, one of the very first things that we did with our collaborative ministry team was to write a covenant. And the first line of the covenant acknowledges that the 3 churches have 3 very different histories and 3 very different cultures, and that the collaboration will in no way override any of that. So we acknowledge the cultural difference right up front. It's not huge, but it's significant in terms of what each congregation kind of wants. And so we're having to be very, very careful that we get buy-in from the things we're trying to do as a group.
We're dealing with this now because the 3rd potential gathering is Lake Norman, which is an existing congregation. and has been an existing congregation, so really different than founding Salisbury. And one thing that helped us early on was to talk about vision and to connect their vision and story to our vision and story where it was connectable, and to keep trying to stay focused on that while also acknowledging the potential losses and pitfalls. We also were cautious because there's a size difference, so Piedmont is much larger than Lake Norman, that it really had to be their decision to ask to go down the road of looking at becoming a gathering. And that we really had to work to say, this is your discernment. We'll provide the information that we can provide, so that it doesn't feel like you're being forced into it. We were very clear that we thought this was a sustainable model, but that was from our vantage point, and here's why. And Jake has more experience, I think, in Oak Ridge with this very question.
So we've been trying since about 2010, working with existing congregations, neighboring congregations, to work cooperatively. And I guess I would say a lesson that I've had is to try to be candid and frank about power and about decision making, because the impulse, I think, for religious liberals and nice people like all of us is to talk about collaboration and cooperation. And that is true. And there's the spirit of grace and forgiveness and generosity required if this is ever going to work. And, there was a time 2 years ago where a staff member who was employed by 3 different churches, ours was one, needed to be let go for misconduct. And we needed to make a decision quickly. And that was an interesting thing to watch with our policy governance. It was a quicker process. Smaller church decision processes were more, took more buy-in, more kind of consensus building, which is fine for their culture, and normal for their culture. But I do think it's important just to talk through decision making, and that's maybe what Robin talked about. Policy governance is so helpful for the gathering model. That may not be possible working with yoking existing churches together, but what may be possible is allocating responsibilities so that when agreement is not possible, one church or another, and doesn't need to be the larger church or the ostensibly more established church, but it's clear beforehand who makes what decisions. And one way to have that conversation is to do a trial collaboration on some low stakes thing, where we're going to have a picnic together and see how it goes and see how we manage, and then reflect explicitly on decision-making process and on power, because I think that's just unavoidable. So anyway, those are my 2 cents.
The other thing, even with Salisbury, that we did early on that we haven't mentioned, but I would advise, is we were really clear. I remember even we made hand motions, like, if this is what we're talking about, this is what we can do together. And we named the things inside the circle, right? And then we named things outside the circle and said, if this is what you're seeking, or this is what you're envisioning this to be like, we can't promise you that. So being explicit not only in what you're naming that you're promising, but also explicit in what you're not promising.
That's really helpful. Yeah, we did have Jake, in terms of the decision making. Our team, these 9 people, made the decisions about the multi-church service that we had in June. And we did get some pushback from at least one church saying, who had the authority to cancel church on that Sunday? Because we had only church at only one of the 3 churches that Sunday, and it meant a lot of traveling for people. And we really got some pushback on that. So we're wrestling with that this year, as how are we going to have the power, use the power. Are we going to become there's been a suggestion that we become a separate functioning entity with our own budget, which is an interesting path to think about. But so far, we've been trying to be very careful about those power decisions and making sure we get buy-in, but you can't always get 100%, as you know.
I wanted to ask about the phase one part of this and how Launchpad works in that phase. There's a lot of people making sounds about collaboration between two churches for sure within half hour of each other. So I'm trying to understand what it is you do in that first phase or how this could be helpful in that first phase.
So I just began phase one in Oak Ridge with Jake. Can I use you all as an example? Okay. This is cooperative learning on the fly here. So we just began phase one, which meant I did a site visit. Before that site visit, I had completed demographic studies. During the site visit, I visited the current location of the congregation and also visited the projected partnership sites, if you will. And then I met with members of the board, explained what Launchpad does and the overall model. And then out of that, crafted a proposal, had a follow-up Zoom phone call with Jake's board, and said, here's what I think could work based on the experience, based upon the numbers, frankly, and the demographics. Here's what this could look like. Here are some challenges you're going to have. Here's a timeline. And then, engage questions with the board. If there had been another community, if we were doing more of a yoked model, I would not only be doing that process with one congregation, but with multiple communities. So we're doing all the research. So the hard numbers, pulling it up, demographics in the area, projected pledging, all that.
And I'll say one thing that was just as a tidbit for why Robin's perspective was helpful, not only that she's got a model in mind, but we've got a cluster of households who live to the north of us in a very rural county. And through talking with Robin, some folks, including me, came to see it makes a lot more sense to organize in a town nearby that is at a hub of highways and where it's easier to get to, rather than planting where three families happen to live out in the middle of nowhere, where it's harder where there's not much population density or access. Because I was thinking relationally, because I know these people, it seemed like a lot bigger potential, and Robin's outside perspective was able to see it from a bird's eye view and think strategically. So that was an experience I had.
So we're getting pretty close to wrapping up. I want to make sure you all have our contact information. So we're going to follow up with an email here to you. We will send you the launchpad.faith website. Jake, would you be willing to do a minute on Faith Rocket so folks are aware of what that is real quick?
Yeah, sure. At faithrocket.org, you'll find a theme-based ministry that's a partnership between Launchpad and Church of the Larger Fellowship. We're using, if you go to faithrocket.org, you'll see that it's small group materials, it's social media materials, it's Sunday scripts, and you can do it on a month-by-month subscription. You can do a piece-by-piece, a la carte, even to the extent of pay for the subscription, and we will put the stuff up on your social media page. For smaller churches that don't have a minister, sometimes those Sunday materials are helpful. For larger churches, 50 and more, sometimes they've got a minister, but they really don't have small groups or social media, so pushing it out there, using the rich multimedia resources of the CLF is a way to enhance your ministry at not much cost. So anyway, I hope you'll check that out.
So we're right at 2:30. That pretty much wraps up our time. I don't know if it flew by for y'all, but it did for me. I'm excited just heard a snap of your stories, and I would love to learn more. So please be in touch with us. We're going to be sending along our contact information. Thank you so much for joining us today, and for all the ways in which you're bringing Unitarian Universalism out into the world. Your light shines bright this day, and I'm grateful for it. Take good care, y'all.